Most people who use Claude at work are using about 10% of what it can actually do. And most people who should be using Claude at work haven't started yet. This episode is for both of those people. I want to start by being honest with you about something. The reason most people don't get value from Claude isn't that Claude isn't good enough. It's that nobody showed them how to use it. They opened it, typed something vague, got something generic back, and closed the tab thinking, okay, that's what the fuss is about. That's not what the fuss is about. What this channel is, what this episode is the thing that should have existed from the beginning. A proper introduction to Claude as a working tool. Not a demo, not a highlight reel, an actual practical, here's how you use this guide for people who have real work to do. By the end of this episode, you'll have done your first real Claude task. You'll understand why Cowork changes everything about how Claude fits into your working day, and you'll have a starter kit that gives you a structured first week. We'll get to all of that. Let's start with who this is for. If you're a paralegal, an executive assistant, a project manager, a consultant, a small business owner, a freelancer, an office manager, a teacher, a healthcare administrator, or honestly, anyone who works at a desk and deals with documents, emails, decisions, and other human beings, Claude is going to change the way you work. Not in a vague, eventually maybe kind of way. In a this week, this task, this afternoon kind of way. And I want to be specific about what that means, because the word change gets thrown around a lot in conversations about AI, and it tends to mean nothing. So let me be concrete. The paralegal who spends 3 hours drafting a letter before a hearing, Claude drafts it in 4 minutes, and it's good enough that she's spending the remaining time on strategy, not structure. The project manager who needs to synthesize notes from 6 different stakeholder meetings into a coherent status report, Claude does that in the time it takes to make a coffee. The EA who needs to turn a rough brief from her director into a polished board presentation, Claude builds the skeleton. She refines it, and they're done before lunch. These aren't hypothetical. This is what happens when people learn to use Claude properly. And properly is the key word. Because the same tool that feels underwhelming when you use it wrong feels genuinely transformative when you use it right. The difference isn't the tool, it's the brief. We'll come back to that. It's the most important thing in this entire episode. Claude for Work is the channel that makes you genuinely excellent at using Claude as a professional. Not AI in the abstract. Not every new feature the moment it drops. Not theory. The most capable, organized, clear-headed version of yourself at work, using Claude as the tool that gets you there. We cover Claude's core interface, Cowork, documents, prompts, systems. We build things with you, not at you. And every episode is structured so that by the time the video ends, you've actually done something, not just watched someone else do it. The channel is built as a progression. This episode, Complete Beginners, is your foundation. From here, First Steps takes you into more complex tasks and deeper setups. Workflows gets into full professional systems, and the Deep Dive series goes long form on specific professional scenarios. You don't need to watch them in order, but the people who do tend to move fastest. There's a logic to the progression that compounds. This episode is about getting you to a place where Claude is actually useful to you today. Not eventually, today. Let's look at what's actually happening with Claude in professional contexts, because the numbers tell an interesting story. Anthropic has published research on how Claude is used across enterprise environments. Among businesses integrating Claude into their workflows, 77% of tasks are fully automated. Claude isn't just assisting, it's completing, end to end. Now, that's the enterprise picture, the companies with dedicated AI integration teams and custom setups. But it points to where things are heading, and more importantly, it points to the gap that exists right now for individual professionals. Because while enterprise is automating 77% of tasks, most individual professionals are using Claude for none of theirs, or they've tried once or twice and it felt underwhelming. That gap between what Claude is doing at scale in organizations and what you've experienced on your own is the opportunity this channel is built around. The individual professional who understands how to use Claude well is operating at a significant advantage over colleagues who don't, not because they're working harder, because they've got a working system. That's what we're building today. Here's the honest picture of how most people experience Claude for the first time. They open it, they type something like, "Write me an email about the project delay." They get back something generic that doesn't sound like them, doesn't know the context, and requires so much editing it would have been faster to just write it themselves. They close the tab, they conclude that AI is overhyped. And they're not wrong that what they got was underwhelming, but they're drawing the wrong conclusion. The problem wasn't Claude, the problem was the prompt. A vague instruction gets a vague result, every time. This isn't unique to Claude. It's true of any capable collaborator, human or AI. If you walk up to the best writer you know and say, "Write me an email about the project delay," they'll ask you a dozen questions before they start. Who's it going to? What's the relationship like? What happened? What do you need them to feel at the end of it? How long should it be? Claude is the same. It needs a brief. And a brief is just a structured way of giving context. Once you know how to write one, and it takes about 30 seconds once it's natural, everything changes. The rest of this episode is essentially a masterclass in that one skill. Everything else we cover, Cowork, project context, iteration, is built on top of it. Before we go anywhere near the interface, I want to lock in the single most important idea in this entire episode. Claude is only as good as what you ask it. That's it. That's the whole lesson. Everything we cover today is either teaching you to ask better or building systems so you don't have to ask as much. The people who get extraordinary results from Claude aren't using some secret technique. They're not prompt engineers with years of experience. They're just people who've learned to be specific, to give context, to treat Claude like a capable colleague who needs a proper brief, not a search engine you throw keywords at. A search engine rewards brevity. Claude rewards clarity. Write that down if you need to, because it's the thing that changes everything. Now, let's get you into the interface. Claude is made by a company called Anthropic. To use it, you need an account. Unlike some AI tools where you can search the web, land on the page, and start typing without logging in, Claude requires you to be signed in. There's a free tier. You don't need to pay anything to get started. There are paid plans that unlock more usage and more features, and we'll talk about those as they become relevant. But for right now, an account is all you need. A quick note for those of you coming from ChatGPT. Claude and ChatGPT are different products made by different companies. They're both AI assistants, but they're built differently, they behave differently, and Anthropic's own data shows that Claude has a significant edge in professional and work-related tasks. If you've tried ChatGPT and found it useful, you'll find Claude at least as capable. If you've tried it and found it underwhelming, give Claude a proper go before you make up your mind about AI for work. Once you're signed in and looking at Claude, the interface is deliberately simple. There's a text area where you type, there's a panel where Claude responds, there's a sidebar where your previous conversations are stored. That's the whole thing. No complex dashboard, no setup wizard. You just write and Claude writes back. The simplicity is intentional. Claude is designed to feel like a conversation. Where the depth lives, and where this channel spends most of its time, is in learning how to have better conversations with it. There's something else you need to know about from the start, and that's the Claude desktop app. The web interface is Claude's core home. It's where you can start immediately, and it's where we'll do our first task today. But Cowork, Claude's dedicated workspace for project and task management, lives inside the desktop app. It's a separate download. Getting it is straightforward. Head to Anthropic's website and find the Claude desktop download. Search Claude desktop app if you can't locate it immediately. The exact location shifts as Anthropic updates their site, but it's always findable. Download it, install it, sign in with the same account you use on the web. You're connected. I'd recommend getting it downloaded now if you haven't already. Run it in the background while we work through the first task in the web interface. By the time we get to movement 4, you'll want it ready. The reason Cowork matters, and I'll show you this in detail later, is that it solves the biggest limitation of chat. In chat, every conversation starts fresh. Claude doesn't remember what you talked about yesterday or last week or in the project you've been running for 3 months. Every time you open a new chat, you're starting from zero. Cowork gives your work a home. Projects, persistent context, tasks Claude holds across time. Same Claude, completely different experience. But first, let's use chat, because chat is genuinely powerful for individual tasks, and it's where you're going to have your first real Claude moment. 3 things. That's all the interface is. The text bar, where you write. Think of it like a search engine that actually reads what you write and thinks about it before responding. You can type 1 sentence or 10 paragraphs. You can paste in a document and ask Claude to do something with it. You can describe a situation in your own words without worrying about formatting or structure. Just write. The response panel, where Claude writes back. What comes back isn't a list of links. It's a response, a thought-through, contextually aware reply to what you said. The quality of that reply is almost entirely determined by the quality of what you sent. The sidebar, where your conversation history lives. Every chat you've had is stored here and accessible. You can return to any thread, continue any conversation, and refer back to anything Claude has produced for you. Think of it as your working archive. That's the whole interface. There's nothing hidden, nothing complex. The sophistication is entirely in how you use it, not in the tool itself. One more thing before your first task. Claude is a conversation partner, not an oracle. It doesn't hand down finished, perfect outputs on the first try, and you shouldn't expect it to. What it does is give you something strong to work with, quickly, that you then shape and finalize. The workflow is you brief, Claude drafts, you direct, Claude refines, you finalize. That loop, brief, draft, direct, refine, is the core of how professional Claude use works. We'll see it in action in a moment. The other thing to know is that Claude doesn't have feelings about being corrected. You can say, that's not quite right, try again. Or, the tone is off, make it warmer. Or, this is too long, cut it by half. And it'll adjust without ego, without complaint, without starting over from scratch in a way that loses what worked. That combination, speed, quality, and total willingness to iterate, is what makes it genuinely useful as a working tool, rather than a novelty. Right? Let's do this. The most common thing people use Claude for at work is writing. And this makes complete sense. Writing is universal. Every professional role involves some form of written communication. Emails, reports, proposals, summaries, briefs, meeting notes, presentations. And writing is also the thing that most of us find quietly exhausting, even when we're good at it. So we're starting here. Not because writing is all Claude can do, it's far from it, but because this is the task where the value of Claude becomes immediately, undeniably obvious. And once you've seen it, everything else we teach you in this channel will make more sense. Writing is also where the brief framework shows its value most clearly, because the difference between a good brief and a bad one is completely visible in the output. You'll see exactly what I mean in a moment. Here's our scenario. You're a project manager. A key deliverable has been pushed back by 3 weeks because your primary supplier has flagged a production delay. You need to write an email to your stakeholder group, around 12 people, a mix of senior leadership and operational team members, explaining what happened, what it means for the overall timeline, and what you're doing about it. This is not an easy email to write. It's the kind of message where tone matters as much as content. Too casual and it seems like you're not taking it seriously. Too formal and it feels like a legal disclaimer. You need to be clear, calm, accountable, and reassuring, all at once. Most people would sit staring at this for 20 minutes before typing the first word. Let's give it to Claude. First, the bad version, so you can see exactly what we're talking about. Most first-time users would type something like, write an email about a project delay. Claude will produce something. It'll be grammatically correct, professionally formatted, and completely generic. It won't know who the email is going to. It won't know what kind of delay, what caused it, what stage the project is at, what the relationship is with the stakeholders, or what tone is appropriate. It'll write something that could apply to any delay, in any project, in any company, anywhere in the world. And you'll read it and think, I still have to write this email. Because you do. That output isn't usable. It's a template at best, something you have to completely personalize before it means anything to anyone. This is the experience that makes people think Claude is mediocre. It isn't. The prompt was. Here's what a proper brief looks like. I'm a project manager writing to a stakeholder group of around 12 people, a mix of senior leadership and operational team members. A key deliverable has been pushed back by 3 weeks because our primary supplier notified us of a production delay. The original deadline was end of next month. I want to write an email that acknowledges the delay clearly, explains the cause without being defensive, outlines what this means for the broader timeline, and reassures stakeholders that we have a mitigation plan in place. Tone should be professional but direct, not overly formal, around 200 to 250 words. That's the same task, but now Claude has everything it needs. It knows who's writing, a project manager, not a CEO, not an intern. It knows who's receiving it, a mixed group of seniority levels. It knows exactly what happened and why. It knows what the email needs to accomplish: acknowledge, explain, outline, reassure. It knows the tone. It knows the length. None of that took long to write. It took maybe 90 seconds. But those 90 seconds are the difference between getting something usable back and getting something you have to throw away. Let's look at what comes back. What Claude returns is a complete, professional, usable email. It opens with the delay, no burying the lead. It explains the cause in the first paragraph, clearly and without defensiveness, because you told it that was the tone you needed. It maps out what the timeline impact is in plain language, not jargon, not hedging. And it closes with reassurance that you're on top of it and will be in touch with a revised plan. You might change a word or two. You might add a specific name or reference a particular part of the project that only you know about. But the architecture of the email, the thinking, the structure, the tone, is done. What would have sat in your drafts for 2 days took 30 seconds. And that's not the impressive part. The impressive part is what happens next, because this is where most people stop, and it's where the real value starts. Let's make that brief structure explicit, because it's the foundation of everything in this channel. When you bring a task to Claude, you're giving it a brief. A good brief covers 6 things, and you don't need to use them as a checklist every time. Once the habit is built, you'll just write naturally, and these will all be there. First, your role, who you are or what role you're writing from. This tells Claude the voice, the authority level, the professional context. Are you the person who has to own this message, or are you writing on behalf of someone else? That changes everything about how Claude writes. Second, your audience. Who is this for? Their level of seniority, their relationship to you, what they know already, what they need to know. A message to your own team reads differently from a message to external clients, which reads differently again from a message to the board. Third, the context. What's the situation? What happened? What's the background? The more Claude understands about the actual circumstances, the more specific and useful the output. Fourth, the outcome. What do you need Claude to produce? Not just the format, email, report, summary, but what should it accomplish? What should the reader think or feel or do at the end of it? Fifth, the tone. How should it feel to read? Professional, warm, urgent, calm, direct, diplomatic? Claude is genuinely good at tone, but it needs to know what you're going for. Sixth, constraints. Length, format, anything specific to avoid. If there's a word limit or a particular structure you need, say so. Role, audience, context, outcome, tone, constraints. 6 things. In any order, in your own words, every time. Now, the bit most people miss. The first output isn't the finished product. It's the starting point for a conversation. And that conversation is where Claude's value compounds. Say the email Claude drafted is 90% right, but the closing paragraph feels a bit flat. You type, The closing feels a bit flat. Can you make it warmer and more direct? I want them to feel confident that I'm handling it, not just informed that it's happening. Claude rewrites the closing, specifically, in context, without losing what worked in the rest of the email. Or say the opening is too formal for the relationship you have with these particular stakeholders. You type, "The opening is a bit stiff. This group and I have a good working relationship, so it can be a bit less formal. Keep the directness, but bring it down a notch." Claude adjusts. It doesn't start over. It doesn't ask you to re-explain the whole scenario. It holds the context of the conversation and makes the specific change you ask for. This is the brief, draft, direct, refine loop I mentioned earlier. And once you're comfortable with it, you'll find that almost nothing takes you very long anymore. Because you're not starting from scratch, ever. You're always working with a strong first draft that Claude produced in 30 seconds, and you're shaping it into the finished thing. Your role changes from writer to editor. An editor is a much more comfortable place to work from. Now we want you to try it. Think of a piece of writing that's currently on your to-do list, an email you've been avoiding, a summary you need to write, a proposal, a brief, a meeting agenda, a performance review draft. Something real, not a practice scenario, an actual thing that needs doing. Open Claude. Write your brief. Use the 6 elements, even roughly, even imperfectly. You don't need to be formal about it. Just give Claude the context it needs to help you properly. See what comes back. Then try directing it. Change one thing, ask it to adjust one element. See how it responds. You're not looking for a perfect output. You're looking for the experience of having most of the work done for you in a way that you can then shape and finalize. That experience, that specific moment where you read what Claude produced and think, okay, I can actually work with this, is the moment everything shifts. Once you've had it, you'll understand what this channel is for. Go and try it now if you want to. Pause the video. We'll be here when you come back. Welcome back. If you've just done your first Claude task, you've experienced something that most people never quite reach, the feeling of Claude as a genuine working partner rather than a novelty tool. That's the foundation. But chat has a limitation, and it's worth being honest about it before we go further. Every conversation in Claude Chat starts fresh. When you open a new chat, Claude doesn't know who you are. It doesn't know what organization you work for, what your role is, what your stakeholders care about, what your communication style is, or what you've been working on for the past 3 months. You have to re-explain all of that every single time, or your outputs stay generic. For a one-off task, that's fine. You write the brief, Claude helps, done. But for ongoing professional work, the kind of work that makes up most of what we actually do day to day, that starting from scratch problem is a real drag. It caps how useful Claude can be. Cowork solves this, and it changes the experience fundamentally. Cowork is Claude's dedicated environment for project and task management. It lives inside the desktop app, and it gives you 3 things that chat can't. Projects. You can organize your work into named projects: a client, a campaign, a team initiative, a recurring responsibility. Everything related to that project lives in one place. You can come back to it a week later, and Claude picks up exactly where you left off. Tasks. Within projects, you can create tasks and assign them to Claude. Not just ask Claude a question, actually give it a piece of work to complete and track. It changes the dynamic from conversation to delegation. And persistent context. This is the big one. When you set up a project in Cowork, you write a project context, a short description of who you are, what the project is, who the stakeholders are, what the goals are, and any preferences or conventions Claude should follow. You write it once. Claude holds it across every interaction within that project, indefinitely. You never explain yourself again. That's not a small thing. Think about how much of your brief writing in chat was just getting Claude up to speed. In Cowork, it's already up to speed. Every task you bring it starts from a position of full context. Let me show you the difference concretely. In chat, you open a new conversation and type, "Help me draft a client update email." What Claude returns is reasonable but generic. It doesn't know who the client is, what the project is, what stage you're at, what the relationship is like, or what your communication style tends to be. You fill in all the gaps. You provide all the context. You do all the heavy lifting that the brief requires. In Cowork, you're inside the project for that client. You set up the context 6 weeks ago. You told Claude who the client is, what you're working on together, what their priorities are, how you typically communicate, and what kind of tone works best for this relationship. You type, draft a client update email. And what comes back is specific. It knows which client. It knows the project. It knows the tone. It knows what matters to them. Same Claude, same request, completely different result because the context is already there. And that compounds. The longer you use a project, the more context Claude has, and the better and faster the outputs get. You're not just using a tool, you're building a working relationship. Setting up a project in Cowork takes about 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes make everything that follows faster. Open the Claude desktop app and navigate to Cowork. Create a new project and give it a name, something that reflects the work clearly. A client name, a project title, a team name, whatever makes sense for how you organize your thinking. Then write your project context. This is the most important step, and it's worth spending a bit of time on the first time you do it. You're telling Claude everything it needs to know about this project, your role, the organization, the specific project or responsibility, the stakeholders involved, the goals, the communication preferences, any conventions you follow. It doesn't have to be long. A solid paragraph or 2 is enough. Here's an example, and I want you to notice how much information is packed into a short space. This project is for our quarterly stakeholder communications. I'm the communications manager for a mid-sized logistics company. Our stakeholder group includes the board, 3 senior operational leads, and 2 external partners. Communications should be professional, clear, and direct. We don't use corporate jargon. Our reporting cycle is monthly, with a major summary at quarter end. Current focus, Q3 performance, supply chain updates, and the new technology integration rollout. That's one paragraph. And now every single task you bring to this project, every draft, every summary, every plan, starts from that foundation. Claude knows the organization, the stakeholders, the tone, the current priorities. You never explain any of it again. Add any relevant documents, background briefs, previous outputs, reference materials, then start working. Let's walk through a complete project together, something concrete enough that you can map it to your own work. Scenario: you've just been given responsibility for designing and documenting a standardized onboarding process for new team members. Currently, there's no written process. It's entirely ad hoc, depends on whoever's available, and produces wildly inconsistent results. Your job is to create something clear, repeatable, and simple enough that anyone in the team could run it. You set up the project in Cowork. You write your context. This project is to design and document a standardized onboarding process for new team members. I'm the operations coordinator. Currently, there's no written process, entirely ad hoc. Goal: something clear, repeatable, simple enough that anyone could run it. New hires typically join in operational or administrative roles. Professional services firm, around 40 staff. Plain and direct, no corporate language. First task: you type, create a first draft framework for our onboarding process. Include the key stages, what should happen in each stage, and who's responsible. Keep it high level. We'll develop each section further. What comes back is a structured, professional onboarding framework. Stages, responsibilities, clear ownership. Not perfect, no first draft is, but 80% of the way there. The structure holds, the logic is sound. What would have taken you half a day of staring at a blank document took 3 minutes. Now you iterate. The IT setup stage is too vague. Expand it into a checklist of everything that needs to be in place before the new hire's first day. Claude expands it, specifically in the same format without losing the rest of the document. Add a section for 30, 60, 90-day check-ins with suggested questions for each checkpoint. Claude adds it. When you're happy with the structure, produce the full onboarding process document based on what we've built. Format it clearly, plain language throughout, and include a one-page summary at the front that someone could read in 2 minutes and understand the whole process. What comes back is a complete document, not a draft with placeholders, a document. You review it, make your edits, put your name on it. 2 hours instead of 2 weeks. Here's what I want you to understand about what just happened and why it matters beyond this specific scenario. Every project you set up in Cowork gets better over time. The context compounds. As you work within a project, Claude builds familiarity with the work, the stakeholders, the standards, the style. Each task you bring gets faster and more accurate than the last. But the bigger thing is what happens to you. 6 weeks from now, if you work through this channel and build the habit, you're the person in your team who just handles things. The document is done before anyone expected it. The email went out while others were still thinking about how to phrase it. The project is on track because it has a clear process and Claude is helping you hold it. You're not working harder, you're working on rails. That feeling of having a system, of knowing that when a task lands on your desk, you have a way of dealing with it that reliably produces good results. That's what this channel is building toward, one episode at a time. Every project type has a Cowork equivalent: client management, team communications, strategic planning, process documentation, reporting, business development. Whatever the recurring work in your professional life is, it can have a project, a context, and a Claude who knows exactly what to do with it. Let's look at where we go from here. Complete beginners. That's today. You've got your first brief framework, your first Cowork project, and the foundation of a working system. First steps is the next episode, and it's where we start building real professional Claude habits. More complex tasks, deeper Cowork setups, the specific skills that separate people who use Claude occasionally from people who use it as a genuine working layer across everything they do. Workflows is where we go fully professional. We look at how a communications team uses Claude, how a legal practice uses it, how a solo operator builds a Claude-native business that runs at the pace and quality of a much larger team. And the Deep Dive series is exactly what it sounds like: long-form tutorials on specific professional scenarios. If you're a project manager and you want to see a complete Claude-native project workflow from kickoff to stakeholder report, that's where you'll find it. Same for every other professional context we cover. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell me in the comments, what's the work task you most want to hand to Claude? What's the thing you're most hoping this channel helps you solve? I read them all, and your answers shape the episodes we make. Everything we covered today, the brief framework, the Cowork setup, the iterative workflow, I've pulled together into something you can keep and use immediately. It's called Your First Week with Claude at Work. It's a PDF starter kit, and it's $27. Here's what's inside. Day 1, your first brief. The framework we covered today as a reusable template you can apply to any task immediately. Not just the theory, an actual fill-in structure with examples for the most common professional writing scenarios. Day 2, your first project. A step-by-step Cowork setup guide for your most important current project, with a context template you fill in once and use forever. Includes prompts to help you write the best possible project context for your specific kind of work. Day 3, your first iteration. A crystal clear step-by-step for how to make your first iteration of any form, including what to look for, what to change, and how to keep going. And feedback templates, so you can always get clear questions and answers from people. And finally, some bonus content for being quick to secure your spot. Day 4, your first problem solving. The brief framework, plus a 4-step system for how to use Claude to solve pretty much any obstacle you encounter, including technology problems, creativity blocks, and technical challenges. Day 5, your first opening. The 1-page cheat sheet for how to get Claude to start pretty much anything you want, including emails, proposals, planning, and workflows. Day 6, your first planning. A 3-question system for how to turn any project into a clear work plan, including breaking it down, planning for feedback, and managing time. Day 7, your first feedback. The 5-step system for how to master Claude's AI brain and get it to give you only what you want every time, including professional feedback, revisions, and delegation. And finally, some bonus content for being quick to secure your spot. Day 4, your first problem solving. The brief framework, plus a 4-step system for how to use Claude to solve pretty much any obstacle you encounter, including technology problems, creativity blocks, and technical challenges. Day 5, your first opening. The 1-page cheat sheet for how to get Claude to start pretty much anything you want, including emails, proposals, planning, and workflows. B says, your first planning. A 3-question system for how to turn any project into a clear work plan, including breaking it down, planning for feedback, and managing time. B said it, your first feedback. The 5-step system for how to master Claude's AI brain and get it to give you only what you want every time, including professional feedback, revisions, and validation. Day 3, your first workflow. 5 of the most common professional tasks: email, report, meeting prep, process documentation, summary, with example briefs and what strong output looks like for each one. It's a reference you'll come back to. Day 4, your first system. How to build a Claude working system that covers your actual job, not just individual tasks. What to put in Cowork, how to structure your projects, how to build the habit so it sticks. Day 5, your first review. A simple self-assessment that shows you exactly how far you've come in 5 days and where to focus next, so the learning doesn't stop when the PDF ends. $27. That's less than an hour of your professional time. If this kit saves you 2 hours in the first week, and it will, conservatively, you've returned it many times over. And every week after that is pure gain. The link is in the description. Go and get it. That's episode 1. You've got your first brief framework: role, audience, context, outcome, tone, constraints. You've got your first Cowork project. You've got the brief, draft, direct, refine loop that makes every task faster and better than the last. That's not nothing. Most people who've been using Claude for months don't have all 3 of those things locked in. The channel from here is built on that foundation. Each episode adds a layer. Each layer compounds. And 6 months from now, if you stick with it, you'll be operating at a level that genuinely surprises people who work alongside you. Serious skills, actual output. Every time. See you in the next one.